Let's do this. Hello, my name is Jared Walsh and this is my brand new podcast. I've been working on this concept for a while now and finally I can share it with you. I'm really excited about it. I'm really passionate about it and hopefully you do enjoy it. Before we get into it though, and before I introduce my very first guest, I better introduce myself because the joy of podcasting is that you can listen anywhere in the world at any time. So you may be listening in Adelaide, South Australia or Victoria or New South Wales or Guatemala. It doesn't matter. I love podcasting. I listen to it all the time, whether it's from my favourite athletes or my favourite comedians or just my favourite people who talk about life in such a positive way. So a bit about myself. I work in the media in South Australia. I work for a commercial radio station and I also represent a lot of sporting organisations, being the voice on the microphone with a core focus of crowd engagement and really lifting sports presentation to the next level. I've been in the job on radio for 13 years, so I was 19 when I started and I definitely had a lot more hair and less weathered skin. You know, being in this industry has allowed me to meet and be surrounded by a wide variety of individuals who excel in their chosen field. I'm talking elite athletes, elite businessmen and women, elite media performers, and elite entrepreneurs. And no matter how different the job, they all have something in common. They are elite people. You could call them role models. Now, being a member of the media, I know what goes on. Sexy stories sell. What trouble did the local footballer get into over the weekend? Who was sleeping with who? Which teammates don't like each other? Who's in a contract pay dispute? It's juicy, it's clickbaity, and of course, it's apparently what the people want to read about. Just have a look at your local Facebook or Twitter feed. There's so much negativity floating around the world, and I really think it's a shame because there's so much positivity that isn't being shared. And that's where this podcast comes in. So each podcast, I am going to chat to someone whose work you may be familiar with in the spotlight, but wow, they are doing some amazing things away from their chosen profession. We're going to get to know them, find out what makes them tick, find out how they are trying to change the world or the way we think. All in a positive way. I have such an exciting group of people to chat to over the next couple of episodes as well, and I really appreciate you giving this a chance and having a listen. So let's get into it. For the very first time, I am so excited to present to you and introduce to you role models. I mean, you could say I have been thrown in the deep end to record the very first episode of my very first podcast. Two things going through my head. First of all, are you going to press the record button? Will this be a success? And second of all, is anyone going to listen apart from my direct family? Well, both questions were answered positively because I had someone to record it for me and it was in front of a live audience. Yep, I was lucky enough to be asked by the Ozcast network to be a part of the inaugural Adelaide Podcast Festival during the Adelaide Fringe, and I really appreciate the support from those guys and of course the Elephant and British Pub for hosting the night and Coopers. Now this gave me a chance to showcase the podcast and what it's all about. As I said in the intro, half of it's going to be focused on how you may know this guest that I speak to. The other half, some of the stuff you probably don't know about the amazing things they're doing in the community in front of a live audience as well. So it was very interesting to say the least, but so was my guest. Now, he's probably more known for his work in South Australian sport because he was the former general manager of the Adelaide 36ers, Adelaide's National Basketball League side, and he looked after them through a really interesting time. Interesting, remember that word because there's good and bad parts for basketball in South Australia. But right now, he has moved into something else, which is also very interesting. He is a part of the Australian Cannabis Corporation. Now, something which has been in the press a lot around the world and more so South Australia over the past few months. They believe it's going to be fantastic for the state, creating heaps of jobs and bringing in money to the SA economy while saving lives. Now, I don't know anything about drugs. Never even had a cigarette. So I'm fascinated to find out why they think this is going to work in South Australia, how they're going to get money into the state, how they are going to create jobs, and you'll hear some other questions from someone who's really naive about that topic. So I really do hope you enjoy listening to my very first guest live at the Elephant and British Pub. Podcast world, is that what you say? Podcasters, listeners, you. Yes, you. Please enjoy Role Models, Episode 1, my special guest, Ben Fitzsimons. First of all, I wanted to ask you about your role with the Adelaide 36ers, because my role is game night MC. I have a lot to do with the people who play the music. It's about getting the feel of the crowd and selecting the right song. So how did you get into that?
Basically been a long-term fan of the 36ers since I was a little kid. 86, 87, started following the team, started falling in love with basketball, and really hadn't missed a game since 87 till now. And just, I was the kid that was always around, so the management at the time knew I was the kid that was always around, so I got to wipe the floor and mop up sweat of players of my...
Sounds gross.
Oh yeah, well of course, but it's your hero sweat, so it's extra cool, right?
Not really.
Yeah, and so I've always kind of just gravitated back to it. Played a bit of basketball, had a lot of friends who were very successful in it, and always been around. And just one day just decided I could do the music job at the 36ers a little bit better. I had some different ideas, and went to the management there and said, can I have a go? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And off we went.
One of the things that you'll notice about the Adelaide 36ers now, if you go to a game from when Ben was working there, a lot of the music hasn't changed, and that's not just due to laziness, but the crowd just love it anyway, whether it is a little bit of AC/DC, in excess or anything like that. So I want to jump forward really quickly. How do you go from the guy who plays the music to be the bloody general manager of the sporting organisation? How does that happen?
Yeah, well, what happened, there was the man that owned the team at the time, well, he'd done a joint venture with a man by the name of Eddie Groves, who's famous for ABC childcare centres. And the demise of Eddie led to the demise of the 36ers because Eddie was putting the money into the team. The guy who had his name on the licence decided he was just going to walk away and let the team die. And there was a group of us that didn't sit very well with. I'm very passionate about the 36ers. They're a big part of my life, and I think they play a very important role in the community. So I got together with a few like-minded people who decided that we might be able to keep the Sixers playing, put some money on the table and kept it going. And there was never any intention of mine to be the GM, but we basically started from when we bought the logo. That's what we bought. We ended up with a blank sheet of paper, and we needed to get the team on the court in 3 months. So it just came through me being at the meeting, and I was the only one who didn't have a job at the time because I worked for myself doing property developments and that's a fairly non-time consuming thing. And I just said, well, I know these people. I know I've been around for so long. I know who to call. I know how this works. I know that. And it just started that all of a sudden I just became the GM.
One of the things I will never forget from you is that we had this player at the Adelaide 36ers, and his name was Julius Hodge. Now, if you're not an American sport follower, this man had a bit of involvement in the NBA. Like a lot of the times, these sporting clubs, they get imports. So they're big name players that come and play for your local club just to attract the crowds and do amazing things. Now, this player, Julius Hodge, he left the Adelaide 36ers and ended up going to the Melbourne Tigers. And this famous game where the Melbourne Tigers defeated Adelaide, and what Julius did is he walked over to the part of the court where Adelaide 36ers club champion, his name is Brett Maher. His name is written on the court. And Julius went over and started stomping on it, and the crowd went nuts. And Adelaide 36ers fans can get really feral. So it was really, really feral.
Passionate is the word you're looking for.
Passionate. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, if you are a 36ers fan and you're listening, passionate, yeah. So Ben, in the news clips, basically it's normally the players that should be dragged away from this guy, but Ben was the one who was getting dragged away, and it showed me how much you love the club.
Well, there's a bit of a backstory to that. So, number one, Julius and I are friends. Number two, I put the Brett Maher sticker on the court, so I've got a bit of ownership about why that's there. We lost that game in overtime. More thanks to Mark Worthington than anything Julius did. The crowd was unbelievably harassing Julius on every play that night, as they tend to do. They pick a villain and ride that villain all night. Julius had a lot of pent-up frustration for a lot of different reasons, and he decided to leave his mark by stamping on Brett's name. The crowd's getting more involved. He did it a couple of times. Wortho dragged him away. His own captain dragged him away and sort of...
He apologised after as well, didn't Mark? Apologised in the press conference.
Yes, absolutely. So Mark and I have shared some very interesting stories about what happened in the car ride between he and Julius on the way from the stadium back to the hotel, and that didn't go well for Julius in that situation. But basically... it was when he went and spat on Brett's name, I thought, right, you've crossed the line. And I felt of the 7,000 people in the stadium, because I knew Julius well, I thought, right, this is going to tee off here. So I thought, we need to get you out of here. And I told him to just pull his head in and get off the court. And he didn't like when I spoke to him like that. So he decided that I was now his worst enemy rather than one of his mates. And anyway, he got a bit of attention out of that.
We have discussed how you have become the general manager of the Adelaide 36ers, and I want to move to the other part of your life in a second. But what I wanted the people listening and the people here tonight to get an understanding of is how hard it is to be a general manager of a professional sporting organisation, which isn't the number one sport in South Australia. This is an AFL-dominated town where sponsorship will always go to AFL clubs, ticket sales, fans. We are always going to be the poorer cousin, and I say we speaking of basketball. So for you, someone who is the front man as the general manager, how hard is that to get players, get fans and maintain a profit to keep the club alive?
Well, maintaining a profit's very, very difficult. Most NBL teams rely on philanthropy to get through a season, so maybe one, maybe two actually are profitable, but that's across the board for all sports. AFL, I think, announced a loss last year. The A-League makes a loss. It's quite rare for sports teams outside of the US and the English Premier League to actually be profitable, just because of the sheer volume of numbers that are involved in player payments, the cost of running a league, running a game night, staffing, ticket sales, etc. It's difficult. It's difficult, and particularly when you're running a small team, because you've got a small budget, you really are hands-on. Like, you know, I would be washing the toilets before a game would open because we just needed to get things done. So it's not like you're the GM sitting in the glass tower. You get down, you literally get your hands dirty, and that comes back to budget, which comes back to money. So the disadvantage for a lot of sports in Adelaide is because the AFL run such a well-oiled professional machine that they employ wonderful staff. They're very, very professional. You're trying to fish in the same lake where the AFL's sitting there and you've got your little hand line and the AFL's got, you know, the big boat and all, you know, all the nets and everything out there, and you're trying to fish in the same pond. It's very, very difficult.
You've now moved into a different part of your life, which is the reason why I've designed this podcast, to first of all give people an understanding of where they may know you from and your role within the sporting community. Now, just for everybody's knowledge, this podcast isn't going to be just about sporting people. I'm going to be speaking to a lot of media performers and businessmen and women as well. And now you've moved into the Australian Cannabis Corporation, which fascinates me because it's everywhere at the moment. Whether it is someone who has an ill family member who goes, I need this, or whether it's someone who lost their job at Holden who goes, well, actually, you are potentially going to be using my old factory to service marijuana. Explain it to me. You need to sell it to me because I don't know enough about it, and I never want to in my life come across and pretend I know something. So we do have the second half of the podcast for you to say you've moved into something which potentially could help a lot of people. Yeah,
well, that's my belief. That's why I'm putting the time, effort, and energy into it. The medical cannabis. So the issue that faces cannabis at the moment is probably the stigma that's been built up through Hollywood films. Like when you talk, you say marijuana to someone, you know, they have flashes of Cheech and Chong or Jimi Hendrix or the Ted movies where they're sitting around smoking bongs and
Liam from the Bad Cast.
Yeah. Like so, there's a lot of stigma around it. What science has been fighting against, not only is it the prohibition of it, which you can go and put your tinfoil hat on and say why it was prohibited originally, goes back to people that owned forestry versus people that owned cannabis plants, who owned newspapers, the DuPont family wanting it removed so that they could push nylon instead of having hemp ropes, etc. If you went right back in time, us in South Australia, if we were not growing cannabis or hemp on our land, we would have been fined by the police back in the day. So our tolerance and attitudes to it have flipped, and now they're flipping back again. So over the last 30 years, there's been a lot of science starting to be put in towards what cannabis can do. A doctor by the name of Raphael Moshalom, who's an Israeli doctor, discovered that each human being has what they call an endocannabinoid system. So the endocannabinoid system, the word cannabis, cannabinoid, canna, it's all related, right? So breast milk, our mothers, if we've been breastfed, had cannabinoids in the breast milk. So as a baby, our body has been designed to accept cannabinoids into our body, and that's what cannabis does. So what medicinal cannabis is it takes away, it can have, well, not all of it, I'll talk very generally here because I could bog you down in specifics, but basically medical cannabis is the cannabis without the euphoria effect, the high. So there's different components that go into medical cannabis, CBD and THC. THC is associated with the euphoria, the high. They all can do different things to the human body, but medical cannabis is usually associated with a lower amount of what's called the THC, to the point where it doesn't have any mind-altering effect on you.
What are you finding the biggest roadblocks are? And I know that you mentioned the stigma at the start of it. Yeah. I've got lots of naive questions probably, and we don't have time to go through them all. But for you yourself, you're going back and forth with the government. You've got social media can be so powerful but so evil at the same time. So what are you finding as your roadblocks?
I think getting the message across to politicians is probably the tough and hard point, until only in the last probably month that we've actually gotten serious traction with that, because we've had last Sunday here in South Australia we had industrial hemp getting legalised. So industrial hemp is very different to medical cannabis. What that shows me is that the tolerance is changing, the understanding is changing, but if I put my shoes in front of into that of a politician who's been standing in front of mum and dads for the last 30 years telling everyone that this is a gateway drug, that it's a stoner drug, that if you do this you're a no-hoper, you're a this, and then all of a sudden I want you to turn around and say, hey, we can actually cure cancer with this stuff, or we can do this, or we could do that, that's actually helpful, we can stop epileptic seizures almost immediately, all this amazing, wonderful stuff can happen. Yet for the last 30 years I've been telling everyone, don't touch it, it's evil. That's probably where the breakdown needs to start.
Can I ask naive questions now? Because as I said, I'm really naive when it comes to drug culture and things like that. So if you're saying that people who are severely unwell are going to be taken as a treatment, so then for things like drug driving, so how is that affected? Okay,
so that's an interesting one. There's plenty of studies coming out of the US at the moment to show that marijuana or medical cannabis doesn't actually impair your ability to drive, because it actually makes you more cautious, so it makes you more safe. In fact, the data shows states where it's been legalised in the USA, the road toll's actually gone down, because there are people that are using medical cannabis instead of going out and getting drunk, instead of going out and using opiates like oxycodone, and that really has a massive impairment on you, what's colloquially called hillbilly heroin, because it's made from the same plant that heroin's made of. So the data shows that drug driving isn't actually, it can be argued it's not a real thing.
What's the end goal? Because when it first was revealed that the Holden factory is going to be used, and of course all of the positives talking about the amount of money that we can bring into South Australia, creating so many jobs and things like that. But for you and for the people listening and the people here tonight, what is the end goal?
Well, the job is for us to create an industry. I'm a parochial South Australian, I'm a proud South Australian, and it frustrates me no end that we've got stand-up comedians that come to Adelaide use Adelaide as a punchline to their jokes. That bothers me. I think we need an industry here that we can be proud of. We need to generate income for people. We need to create jobs. What medical cannabis does, and has been shown in all states throughout the USA, through Canada, Israel, Spain, I could go on with all the countries where it's been legalised, what it's done for the economy, what it's done for jobs. That's a driver for me, because in South Australia we've been so dependent on manufacturing, and manufacturing is dying in everywhere in the world because our wage costs are so high. We can't compete internationally, whereas with cannabis we can. So we can really inject a huge amount of revenue into the state. We can employ a lot of people, and as a side effect of doing those two things, we can also make people well. So it's a pretty intriguing topic to investigate.
It's pretty fascinating, isn't it? Because when I first spoke to Ben, he was talking about cleaning toilets at the Adelaide 36ers. Now he's trying to do some great things in South Australia. Before I wrap things up, can you please thank my guest, Ben Fitzsimons, here tonight?
Thank you.
It's a fascinating story, isn't it? I mean, this man, Ben Fitzsimons, went from playing the music at the Adelaide 36ers home games, got into property development, ended up saving the club as the general manager with his group, and still clean the toilets before every home game. A very unique job, and I can tell that Ben is wanting to create some more unique jobs at the moment with the Australian Cannabis Corporation. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Will they bring in heaps of money into South Australia, create heaps of jobs, and hopefully save lives? If you want to get in touch with Ben, his Twitter is @BenFitz. That wraps it up, though. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to episode 1. I will be chatting with another guest in the coming days, so you can get this podcast from iTunes and also Stitcher. I have Olympic athletes coming up, and next I'm going to be talking to my favourite television presenter on Fox Sports at the moment, who's about to embark on a really important journey, raising funds for 2 special individuals. So you'll find out who that is really soon. If you want to get in touch with me on Twitter, @JaredWalsh, or Facebook, Jared Walsh MC. Thank you very much for listening to Role Models, episode 1.